I am back. New room, no floating bookshelves this time, but plenty of rugby league to talk about. And well, I've also upgraded my microphone. The NRL is heading over to the US to kick off the 2024 season, as we all know.
I go to America!
But why are they doing this now, and what exactly is the plan around all this? Well, we can have a look at the brief history of rugby league in the US and in North America in general. Now, this isn't going to be exhaustive. There's plenty of dates and there's plenty of incidents that probably pop up that I'm not going to cover here. I might do it in a future video. But the basics are that rugby league has been played in the United States since the 1800s. It, of course, came over because of their connection with England, and the Northern Rugby Football Union split from rugby union in the south of England in the late 1800s. So rugby league has been there or thereabouts for quite a while. There's nothing really over there in the way of a proper professional league like there is in Europe and Australia. And there are various different initiatives and different private enterprises trying to set up rugby league in America, but not much has come of that. There was actually kind of a real interest in rugby league towards the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th century, before American football played on the gridiron that is now the NFL really took off. And in fact, it had some kind of a bit larger than a niche following throughout much of the early 20th century. There was even an American rugby league side that toured Australia in the 1950s, but they were pulled together mostly from players of American football who'd never played rugby league. So there's always kind of been a bit of an interest, but in the past, close to a century, there hasn't been a real groundswell of support for the game in North America due to the growth of their own football code. Interestingly, they actually bid for the 1960s Rugby League World Cup. That, of course, didn't end up in America, it ended up in Europe. And since then, it's had a kind of gradual decline in both popularity and interest in the United States. There has been, forays into North America. In 1987, there was a State of Origin match played in California. Since then, we've actually decided to count that as a win for New South Wales. So technically speaking, there were 4 State of Origin matches in 1987, one of them being the exhibition game in Long Beach. In the 1990s, after that little foray in the late 80s, there was a bit of a pickup in rugby league in America, and there was the American Patriots who actually participated in a sevens tournament. And then later on in the 90s, David New, the former St. George Dragon, he was over in Philadelphia and helped establish a national side there. Super League America itself was formed in 1997, and there's kind of been some kind of interest from an amateur or even possibly semi-professional level over in America, but nothing really concrete, nothing America-wide. And at the moment, most of the rugby league is played in California, and there have been pushes to try and get sides up in New York and Los Angeles, but that hasn't really occurred. If anything, the most interest and the most amount of support has actually occurred in Canada, of course, with the Toronto Wolfpack playing in the Super League a few years ago, and the initial interest from Ottawa, and they tabled a formal bid to enter the lower tiers of English Rugby League, and that, of course, has dried up since COVID, and the English Rugby League club seeing an easy way out not to have to entertain another side from across the pond. But that being said, Toronto has actually picked itself up. They are now playing local games in Canada, and they are helping to try and keep the interest alive in rugby league in North America. But that, of course, brings us to the NRL deciding to touch down in Las Vegas for a crazy weekend of rugby league and showing the people of America the greatest sport on earth. Now, of course, we're getting 2 games being played at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. And look, the one bit of credit I'm going to give to Peter V'landys throughout most of this video is he's actually been pretty upfront about the whole thing. He's been saying the quiet part out loud a lot.
How can you vote for Burns' movie?
Let's just say it moved me to a bigger house. Oops, I said the quiet part loud and the loud part quiet. Oh dear.
And that is, this is all about gambling money. America, despite its reputation, was pretty prudish on gambling. And really, there were only 4 states until recently that legalized sports betting and sports booking. And of course, one of those states was Nevada. But following a 2018 Supreme Court decision, it's now being legalized in more than 30 states in the US. So of course, their pool for sports betting has grown astronomically, and there's a lot more interest from the betting community in pouring money and essentially wasting money on sports betting. And this is where the NRL's lust for cash is actually getting ahead of its support and growth of the game, particularly in North America. Now, betting and influxes of cash have really been what's kept rugby league alive in Australia for a long period of time. Of course, without the pokies being kept in rugby league clubs, well, a lot of the New South Wales rugby league competition wouldn't have had the cash flows available in the 50s, 60s, and 70s to attract talent from Queensland. And further to that, probably a fair few clubs would have folded well beforehand. It's only now that we're starting to see clubs that are still backed by leagues clubs move away from simple relying on the income that pokies can generate. For example, Parramatta Leagues Club, while still quite a large club making a lot of money from poker machines, are investing more towards property and looking at other ways that they can actually make money rather than relying on a source of betting, and something that the state government is looking at trying to either phase out or minimise the damage that betting does in our community. But back to the NRL and what they're actually doing here. And kind of in true NRL fashion, they announced that we're going to the States and this is going to be amazing and there's plenty of money to be made, without all the finer details really being worked out. I mean, it's November when I'm recording this, and only one side, which is the Roosters, have actually announced where they're going to be basing their operations out of in the lead up to the game, right? So where their training facilities are, where their players are staying. And don't forget, they also announced that this game was occurring at Allegiant before realising that the ground was too small for rugby league. Now, they're going to find a workaround here, but it's going to be really up close and personal, similar to the fields over in England. But at least in England, rugby league is played on a lot of those grounds when soccer isn't. So there's been some knowledge about how to organise the field for a rugby league match. Whereas at Allegiant, this is going to be the first rugby league game played at the stadium. There also hasn't been an explanation really, or a focus on the safety of the players beyond just the smallness of the pitch, because a lot of the training facilities that these clubs are looking at are college facilities, and these college facilities, they use artificial turf. And there's a longer discussion here about artificial turf as opposed to grass. I know NRL Physio has done a lot of research on this and has published, I believe it's a free article via his Patreon that actually gets into injury risks and the different risk profiles of artificial turf as opposed to grass. But the bottom line is there are a lot of NFL players that are opposed to playing on artificial turf, and there are monetary reasons for this at the college level. It is expensive, particularly in areas that are either very dry or experience high levels of snow and frost, where it's hard to keep grass growing year round at the quality they need it to play what is essentially professional sport. But rugby league itself is a game that is played on grass, and training is done on grass. And the last thing you want is one of these players to get injured at training on a pitch that they're not used to playing or training on, that then jeopardizes their season or even their career. Artificial grass is not particularly forgiving. It's got very little give in it. When you're on there, your performance can increase, but therefore your risk of injury, in terms of changing direction, and also the way you land can also cause injury, because there's no kind of sponginess to the surface. It's basically, matting on top of concrete, which is not particularly comfortable to play on, especially in rugby league. And then there are, of course, the risks of infection due to the burns and the like that can come up from sliding on artificial grass. And further to this, the NRL has largely ignored building interest from the ground up in the US. They, of course, had the test match there, which wasn't really an NRL game, but there was rugby league played there between England and New Zealand at Denver and Mile High Stadium, and there hasn't been much since then. There hasn't been a lot of support or even, I would say, interest from a lot of circles in America, and there's been no real push from the NRL to try and generate more interest outside of just these couple of games over these next few years. And it's not like it's the first sport to be trying this across different continents. Of course, the NFL plays matches in Germany, they've played them in England, and I believe a couple other countries as well. And what they've done prior to those games is they previously had pathways programs in Europe to try and attract not just interest in NFL Europe, but also try and get players to come through the system and join enough NFL franchises. And in addition to that, they've also had the NFL's international player pathway program, which Jordan Mailata was part of, but has also included a number of players from Austria and Germany and England who have all gone on to play in the NFL. So not only have they generated interest by taking games there, they've also managed to generate interest by enticing athletes from those countries that they're playing in and bring them over to the US and turning them into NFL players. The NRL hasn't done any of that. Instead, what they're doing is taking some top-line games and having to essentially explain the sport on the run. There's been no looking at setting up some kind of pathway program really, apart from some floated ideas by Peter V'landys recently, but there's been no actual thought out given. There's been no strategic plan that's been announced, and nothing really to show this is how the NRL is going to grow its supporter base and its cash flow in America outside of taking a few games a year for the sports betting dollars. There's not even an explanation of how this might increase the chances of a better broadcast deal in the US, which is, again, one of the main way the NRL is funded through its deals with Channel 9 and Fox Sports. Because at the moment, if you're in America and you're trying to watch rugby league, it's very difficult and it's very expensive. It also seems that this move to the US to take some games is a bit of a measuring contest for Peter V'landys up against the AFL. Now, he loves to sink the boot into the AFL for God knows what reason. I mean, there's no reason to pick on another code or pick a fight with another code. But he's done it, and he did it on Sunrise and caused a bit of an awkward moment with Sunrise host Nat Barr saying that Channel 7 could bid for the rights of the NRL. It's beside the point that he's got a deal signed with Channel 9, which was for less than what Channel 7 paid the AFL. So, Peter, the only person you've got to blame there is yourself. It's not Channel 7. And he also seemed to be a little perturbed that the NRL isn't Australia's biggest sport. Now, anyone can make up statistics to support their position.
Oh, people can come up with statistics to prove anything. 40% of all people know that.
NRL, you could say, has the biggest TV audience, which is technically true through the finals, through regular season, and through State of Origin. They do generate some of the largest TV audiences on a yearly basis. But the AFL can then hold on to the fact that they have the largest continuous home attendance, or not just home attendance, but match attendances throughout the season. If you look at football, well, then they have one of the largest junior bases and junior involvement in the sport. And you can also point to the Matildas, who even surpass rugby league when it comes to TV audiences. This isn't just about the US and what the NRL is doing in the American market. It should also be about what else they're doing in the international market. As we've seen recently, the introduction of the Pacific Championship was a great investment in the game, particularly in the off-season just after the NRL season had been completed. We saw some fantastic rugby league between Papua New Guinea, between Samoa, Fiji, Australia and New Zealand, and hey, we got the boil over that is actually really good for international rugby league. New Zealand beat Australia and beat them convincingly in an international tournament. It's something that international rugby league really needs to continue to build its profile, but also attract new viewers, particularly those, if you're looking at it, those from rugby union who are becoming disillusioned with the sport, particularly in Australia and even in New Zealand. These tournaments begin to put some more respect into the Australian and Kangaroos jersey. During the 70s and 80s and into early 90s, the pinnacle of rugby league in Australia was representing your country. It was a big mark of respect for you to be able to not just represent Australia in Australia, but to go on tour and earn your stripes as an Australian Test player. And while some players still point to Australia being the pinnacle of their career or New Zealand, we all see State of Origin very much as the pinnacle, which does freeze out a lot of players when it comes to what is the top level game in rugby league. Before this tournament, it really highlighted how little rugby league Australia has played as a nation when it comes to international competition. They hadn't played a single match outside the 2022 World Cup since 2019. And yes, I know that there was a tour scheduled to go to the UK, and then that was cancelled due to COVID. But there was no push from the NRL to try and get international rugby league up and running like you saw in a lot of other sports, such as rugby union, cricket, and soccer. They all played internationals during that period, apart from rugby league, and particularly Australia. Now is the time, in particular, to invest heavily in rugby league in the Pacific Islands. and to continue building on the Pacific Championships. Obviously, Tonga went over to England to play a 3-match series there, but wouldn't it have been great to have been able to have a tournament that wasn't a World Cup, where you have some of the biggest rugby league nations in the world playing against each other and continuing to not only sharpen their skills but to showcase the international game. It's something rugby union is looking at doing. They've introduced a new 12-team test championship, but interestingly they haven't included Samoa and Tonga, and this is an opportunity for rugby league to continue to build the interest in those Pacific islands. In addition to that, we've also seen that it looks like Papua New Guinea will be the 18th NRL franchise. There are a bunch of issues around that, but one of the key drivers is the Prime Minister himself, Anthony Albanese, who, along with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, is looking to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into PNG, using rugby league as a clear vehicle for that. And I could go into that a bit more here. I won't, because that's, again, another video for another day. But it is showing that the NRL is looking beyond its shores a little bit to Papua New Guinea, but it will be greater to see a greater focus on international competition outside of just club rugby league. And ultimately, the NRL's international growth strategy has to be more than just a couple of games for a few years in America. It really needs to ensure the game continues to build from a grassroots level up and generate the interest that started to generate in Tonga and Samoa, with those players now seeing, the likes of Hamole Kawatu or Marty Taupa'u or even Will Benassini or Isaiah Katoa, those generations of players coming through and either being the first, like Taupa'u or Jason Taumalolo, to go to their island nation and represent them, or the next generation who see those guys representing their country and then want to do it themselves. Just back to this little American trip for now, which undoubtedly Peter V'landys will declare as fantastic and one of the greatest things since sliced bread, and there'll be hardly any real criticism of him, given that they're likely to take a lot of journalists on this little junket trip to America and entertain them in Vegas. They can go one of two ways here. They can take their little sugar hit and, get their gambling money up front and pat themselves all on the back because their balance sheet looks a bit better year on year. But, in the long run, that'll serve to actually undermine their appearances in the US, as crowds just get used to the fact that they're just being used essentially as a cash cow, and the interest will inevitably drop off when the novelty wears off. Or they can do what the NFL did and have an international player pathway program that generates that interest from the ground up, like Jordan Mailata, like Jared Hayne, and even to a lesser extent Valentine Holmes, where you get interest from the Australian public that wouldn't normally watch the sport, but are doing so because people they know are trying it out, or hell, they've even made it, or in the case of Jordan Mailata, they've played in a Super Bowl. This is a chance for the NRL to go beyond just the bright lights and the big headline dollars, and really start to make a long-term investment and small little push into the American market that in American terms would be small, but to the sport of rugby league would be huge. So it's over to the NRL to see, are they going to take the sugar hit or are they going to play the long game?